Good evening to each and every one of you, and welcome to The Lead with Pastor CJ. I'm so glad to have you with us as we take this time to share and to discuss some very interesting and important topics. For all of you that are our well wishers and friends and family, thank you for your continued followings. So many of you follow us with our Sunday morning meditation or participate in our Tuesday 6 a.m. prayer. And we're so grateful and we're thankful for your dedication in following the Clarence L. Sellers Jr. Ministries. Now, this is what I need you to do. I need you to help me with these three things. Or actually, there's four things. Number one, I need you to like, I need you to comment, I need you to share, and I need you to connect four persons to this particular discussion. I need you to connect four persons. You can do so by putting them in the comment thread for people that you know that will be interested in this topic on racism in America. Get your children, get your young teenager boys and girls, and bring them into the conversation, into the discussion, so that we can educate the next generation, so that we can make sure that our people are informed. We are coming live via the Clarence Sellers Jr. Ministries Facebook page, and we're also on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, I want you to go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, let's connect some people to this. I have two outstanding guests, and I want to make sure that they are heard and that we are able to have a meaningful dialogue that can be a blessing to you and your family, to your youth group, to your church group, to people of our community. We want everybody to be able to hear this conversation. So please, ma'am, please, sir, as you're coming in, make sure you like, make sure you comment, and make sure you share. Be free to start a watch party, even start a watch party and share along with us in these moments. We decided, my team and I decided that there needed to be a discussion had on racism in America. Not just have a discussion, but it was very important for us that in this discussion that we dealt with strategies. Most of us acknowledge that racism is real, but we want to help develop and cultivate strategies of how we can improve the life of Black people everywhere, how to empower our community, to think in terms of promoting ourselves, promoting our color, promoting our brand, promoting our culture. And so we decided to have this conversation with two powerful people. After all, this has been a year like no other, but we're going to talk about that in just a few moments. I'm so excited to have with me right here from my area, the 757 of Virginia, the Hampton Roads area. We have attorney, the Commonwealth of Portsmouth attorney Stephanie Morales is here with us today, and I'm so thankful and grateful to have her on with us in this broadcast. Attorney Morales, Stephanie Morales, thank you for sharing with us today. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And then, glad to have you. And then we also have with us a dynamic man of God, a prophet in his own right, the one and only, the Reverend Dr. Charles E. Goodman Jr. of Tabernacle Baptist Church there in Augusta, Georgia. We're so glad, we're so honored to have him on. Good evening, man of God.
Good evening, man. Thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this conversation.
God bless you. Again, we are blessed and highly favored to have these two strong personalities that are supporters of our community and seek to uplift our community. Again, if you have not done so already, I'm asking you to like, I'm asking you to comment, and I'm asking you to share in this moment. To start off, we have just a few moments to start off. I just want to kind of just give an outline of what we're discussing. Again, that we are trying to develop a strategy-based kind of conversation of what we can do as a people. So many of our people are passionate about what they're protesting about. And then there's another group that is not informed on best practices of how to make their voice heard, how to be a part of the process, how to be a part of the solution and not the problem. And so tonight we're looking to inform and to educate our audience on just that. What are the strategies that are needed to move our culture forward. This has been a year like no other that I've seen in my lifetime. And so many others have discussed and shared that they haven't seen one like this. We start off with the tragic loss of Kobe Bryant. Then we move into the pandemic. We're quarantined. So many of our race are losing their lives because of underlying health issues that seem to take us out at a way greater rate than our counterparts. And then we find ourselves moving from pandemic almost into pandemonium as we watch 3 senseless deaths with Breonna Taylor, with Ahmaud Arbery, and now George Floyd, who we all observed him lose his life senselessly. I've invited these special guests on to kind of speak to from their perspective as Blacks in America, as well as we have a male perspective, we have a female perspective. We also have an attorney and a pastor. And so I'm going to let ladies go first, and we're going to ask Attorney Morales from Portsmouth, Virginia, our Commonwealth attorney, if she don't mind just sharing her thoughts on where we are here in 2020. There's some crazy things going on, and I'm looking forward to her insight on tonight.
Thank you so much for having me and for having this discussion where we get to talk about the reality of what's happening to our communities. I will try to be as brief as possible because I have a lot on my heart about what is going on here around our nation. But to sum it up briefly, we are suffering from, years and years upon years and decades and centuries of racism, of systemic oppression, of inequity. And all of that is rearing its ugly head, and it's manifesting itself. And we're seeing the disenfranchisement of people in the Black community in the area of health and wellness. We are seeing the disenfranchisement in the area of the criminal legal system. And we are just seeing a manifestation of years of, our society embracing a comfort level with politeness, with not calling the thing what it is, which is racism. And without calling the thing what it is, which is systemic oppression. And now we are at a point where people are tired, and rightfully so, of accepting this, of watching loss of life, and these conversations that we now have to heal ourselves and our nation are a matter of life and death. And so I am, someone who sees on a daily basis the ills of society, who tries to push back constantly against injustice and to push for equity. And now, I am glad that the rest of the country is aware, but I'm sad to see us hurting because I believe our hearts just collectively broke when we witnessed the events that have been taking place around the country. So I am, again, very thankful and know that this is such a blessing that this conversation is being had. And I very much look forward to having this conversation with the both of you.
Thank you, Attorney. Again, you have been doing such a phenomenal job here in the city of Portsmouth, Virginia, as a trailblazer, as a progressive mind. Your approach is definitely different as a Commonwealth attorney. You have not sought how many people you can put in jail, but how could you work collaboratively with the community to keep as many of our people out of jail? And so I appreciate your hard work. Your hard work has not gone unnoticed. And so we're thankful and looking forward to the continuation of conversation. Again, we have from Augusta, Georgia, pastor of the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church there. He's a great man of God, educated. He's sought after around the country as a speaker. He has I became introduced to him myself at the Hampton Ministers Conference 2 years ago, as he shared in that wonderful conference that so many preachers from around the country, Black preachers that is, gather in time of education and inspiration and information. And he's been so gracious to extend his time to lend his voice to this conversation. So again, good evening, Pastor Goodman. And what say ye on the matters of today?
Man, thank you, Pastor Sellers, again for this gracious invitation to come and share. And thank you also for allowing me to put a suit on for the first time in about 2.5 months. I really appreciate that. To Attorney Morales, thank you again, and look forward to a robust conversation and sharing this platform with you. To be very honest, man, I think, we're just tired. And I think what you're seeing collectively is a people who are wrestling with PTSD. From society. I mean, if you think about it, I think something just broke. I was having a conversation with some friends just this week about how this feels different, because not only on one hand are we wrestling with coronavirus, and I know it may seem odd because it's out of the news cycle, but we are still in a global pandemic. And then to also be kind of hit again with the same old, even though times are different, some things still stay the same, and have the social injustice still come and to evade our lives. So it almost feels as if not only are we fighting the virus of COVID-19, but also the virus of racism again. And so this is a moment that I hope and pray doesn't just metastasize in hashtags and our collective rage, but I'm grateful for the conversation to, first of all, be honest about the state we're in. We're in a point of anger, and that's okay. You know, anger is righteous. There's such thing as righteous indignation. And it's okay to have black rage in the midst of this, because I think that's significant, and to really try to feel the weight of this moment. But then also the conversation has to be progressed at some point about what are next steps. So I don't want to rush the grieving part, because I do believe we are grieving as people, not only collectively, but also individually as a community. And I never want people to rush past the grieving process. But I always, as a leader, a visionary, a thinker, I always think about what's next. So I don't want to create this conversation to say, hey, we got to make the moves right now. No, let's sit in the grief. Let's get a lament. Let's do our protests. I believe in prayer and protest, but then I also believe in praying, protesting, and progressing. And so that's what I think is going to really be helpful as we kind of facilitate the conversation on what we're going to deal with tonight. So thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this. It's so nuanced on so many levels. And so even though we can't be exhaustive for those who are viewing and having conversations about it, I'm not an expert on it, but I do think that we got to still have the conversation and move the conversation to next steps in doing those things.
Thank you, Pastor Goodman. You both of you have shared some things that have hit home to where I am in my heart and my mind. I'm sure there's so many others that can relate to how we're feeling. This has definitely seemed like as if it is a tipping point. Something different about this time. We've seen this so many times, but I'm just amazed to see the outpour. All 50 states in protest. So many more of our white or Caucasian counterparts participating. And then you have the awareness and the awakening that has now become global, where other countries are now participating in protests. But with all that said, with all the protests, with all the T-shirts and hashtags, Attorney, how can you help us? Because we're in voting season, and you know what elections are all about. Not only are we in a voting season, this is a whole new decade, and so we're dealing with census, and a lot of our people don't understand the importance of the census. A lot of people are frustrated with the process of the voting system. The last election, we had on one hand a group that chose to sit out. They thought that we were just going to roll right into the next thing, and that did not happen. And then we had another group that chose to vote, and many of them, not understanding the electoral process, became frustrated and said, what's the use? The person we voted for had the popular vote, still didn't become the president. Attorney, do you mind speaking to the need of us participating and those that may be feeling, out of touch with the whole process, they want to be involved any longer?
Oh my goodness. So, participation is beyond important, and I'm going to tell you why. One, the people in positions of power, many of us are elected to be in these positions. And so it's not just about presidential elections, which are gravely important, as we can see, but these local elections where you select your Commonwealth's attorney or your district attorney or your state's attorney, you get to play a role in determining who is going to be the person who will sit at the helm when we have situations like the ones we have today. And now, we have the ability to voice our opinions and our will for that position through voting. But beyond that, it's like we forget after we vote, we've now been conditioned to a degree to understand the importance of voting, but then we think that's it. Nobody talks about the responsibility and the duty to show up for jury service, to hold your clerk of court accountable, and pay attention to that clerk of court position to see whether people of the Black community are receiving those juror questionnaires to be invited to serve as jurors. Because what's going to happen if we vote, we get the right people in office, we get the charges, and then we demand justice, but we forget all about the part of the participation where we are supposed to show up for jury service and play a role in a fair outcome. And so, not only are we supposed to, it's really basic. Our ancestors and those who came before us, they died, they were hurt. They went through all types of unimaginable things to secure this right for us. This is not a nation where, peaceful protest has always gotten us what we need. There have been times where things have gotten difficult and they've gotten dangerous for our ancestors. And then we resulted in, we as a result had these rights. And so I shouldn't tell anybody how important it is to vote. But once we do vote and once we register to vote, there are other things that come along with that, and jury service is one of them. So I know you didn't mention that, but I could not leave that out, because there is a middle part that our community is not talking about. We're talking about the charges and we're demanding justice, but we are not talking about the responsibility that we owe to those who have lost their lives, who are depending on us to get justice for their families, to pay attention to what we're supposed to be doing when it comes down to our jury service. So, I can speak to it more, but I want to leave it right there. I want to sit that right there. And I want people to understand the importance of the role that we continue to play throughout the course of these processes.
Attorney, you're so right. And I'm glad that you mentioned those things, because there is a multi-layer process to all of this. And so many of us only focus on every 4 years, not looking at the elections in between and how much our state and local officers are a part of our everyday life and impact. And then our responsibility, as you stated, to jury duty, so forth and so on. I have 3 sons from a blended family, 2 girls from a blended family. One son lives in Charlotte and he's an adult in his 20s. 2 other sons, one is in college and one is on his way to college. And while taking care of some business, I saw them out at one of the protests. And one of the first things that came to my mind was for my son that's graduating, part of the class of 2020. We got to keep them lifted up because they were robbed. But we celebrate and support in this graduation season all graduates, high school and collegiate. But my son, as I thought about them out there with the protests, the importance of him signing up and to make sure that he was signed up and registered to vote. Because we got to do more than just protest. Protesting is great, is wonderful, but we got to let our voice be heard. As you stated, our forefathers died for this right and for this privilege, and we cannot allow our voice to be silent in that regard. Pastor Goodman, you struck a nerve with me pretty much when you start talking about everything you said, but you talked about the PTSD and how we're definitely a people traumatized. Yeah. We're traumatized right now on so many different levels. As, again, we have experienced the biggest hit from the pandemic of lives lost, family members that we expected to be with us for years to come, now taking unexpectedly because of this virus. And now we're dealing with history repeating itself. We're all looking forward. Some have already gone back into their churches. Most of us are waiting. But at some point, we're going to hopefully get back into our churches. And as a pastor, we're going to be dealing with a very traumatized people. What else can you add to that as far as from what is the church's role with dealing with the mental anguish and the pain that our people are suffering in this time?
Man, thank you, Pastor. It's a great question. I think at the end of the day, and I lead a predominantly African-American congregation here in Augusta, Georgia. And I think mental health is going to be a very crucial and critical component for us to navigate. I've been advocating that for a long time. I believe in Christ and a counselor. You understand what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
because at the end of the day, we need the mental help, and God has allowed people with expertise to be able to help us through it. So I just did a series at my church entitled Finding the Cure, but I talked about some of the cures, the viruses beyond COVID, but like fear and worry and discouragement and despair and loneliness and even apathy, which I just concluded on last week. And I think we have to get rid of that stigma within our context and within our communities to know that this is real. I really think that the mental issues that we are facing now is going to be long lasting. I think the generation that's coming up behind me are very powerful and progressive, and I'm very proud of their passion. I'm grateful for. I too echo the sentiments of Attorney Morales that I support those peacefully protesting. And I'm grateful for the way it's been going on. This is actually day 10. I don't recall in my lifetime something lasting this long, and doesn't feel like it's slowing down. Right. I feel like it's continued to speed up. And I'm appreciative of the passion for which they share. And but I do realize that this generation, as well as mine, and all of us are going to have sustained help because of what we're wrestling with. I mean, it's COVID-19 is bad enough. I mean, it has decimated majority of our community. You know, if you noticed how the news cycle shifted when they found out it was more Black and brown people dying from this, it moved from being a health crisis to an economic crisis. So we hadn't even got off of that, open things back up, even before we even kind of knew what the virus was happening. So, and then to have this piece of the social justice issues with Ahmaud Arbery, who's right here in Georgia, whose family and mom is actually in Augusta, and he's buried right outside of our city. And then Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and we can just run the list. I think at the end of the day, think about the families. I told my congregation this. I said, the world had to witness the homegoing of George Floyd. And I think Al Sharpton, who did a great job of eulogizing him, made the statement, we didn't want to be here. We didn't plan for this, right? No one wanted to come here. I mean, as much as the movement has been powerful, if you would ask that family, they'd rather have their brother, their son, their nephew back than have this to spark a protest. And out of it is, we got to realize that there are actual people hurting, that are grieving, that are in pain. And I was telling some people that I'm close to, I said, man, I can't escape it. I personally, and I'm a man of faith, love God, but I've been in a hurting place, an angry place. And so I do think we have to do the collective work within our community, not only progressing us forward, but also getting rid of the stigma to say, hey, we're going to have to really deal with the mental part of what's going on as well. And so I'm with you. I think, we have faith and we trust in God, but we also need to make sure that we do the practical things to help us. And that's why I'm grateful for this conversation tonight, because I really want to engage people practically. I think we've had the good, arbitrary, kind of pie in the sky conversations. Now, like what our beloved sister said tonight, all right, we need to get engaged with the process. And I've been, whenever we get to that point tonight, I've been really thinking through that whole moment to movement agenda that I think we can kind of talk through and kind of realize. But I think that's important. We got to put some action to what we're doing. And I believe that therapy and those things, as we progress through this, will be vastly important.
Pastor Goodman, I just had a conversation with a dear friend of mine, Pastor Fleming.
Mm-hmm.
He sent me a text and he said, Sellers, how are you making it through all that is going on? And quite honestly, and hopefully I won't get too much flack, if so, it's okay. Because I believe in what you said, Christ and a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey man, I said, once we get through this, I said, I'm gonna have to go lay up on somebody's chair and I'm gonna have to have a conversation with my counselor.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of pressure. And people think sometimes that as leaders that we have some super power, that we have an extra battery pack that others don't have in us to help us make it through. But this is a lot. You have your flock that is looking to you for answers. You have your family looking to you for answers. And we all feel the pain of what we're seeing on television every day. And so I'm a big proponent that God has blessed us with good sense. He's blessed us not just to be super spiritual and not use the practical tools that he has given us, such as counselors. And so all of us are going to need to take time. I told them earlier today, I don't need a mental day. I'm going to need a mental quarter for a while. When everything died down, I'm going to need a real good vacation and a real time to really process all that we have endured just this first 6 months.
Yeah, man, it's only been 6 months, really 5 months and
right.
3 or 4 days.
Absolutely.
So
right. Attorney, help walk us through as we kind of shift the conversation to the process. If you can just help us as an attorney, walk us through where we are. The other day, or yesterday, that is, the other 3 police officers were also brought in, and then the charge was moved from 3rd degree to 2nd degree murder. For those that may not understand, may not have caught the news loop, can you work us through the process of where we go from here in this type of situation?
Yes. So I had to do a little bit of research because, of course, every state, whether, people realize this or not, attorneys have to be licensed in the state in which they practice. So we all have different bar exams because we have very different statutes and code sections, and our laws are all structured differently. And so here in Virginia, we don't have, the same homicide statute structure as Minnesota. So I had to look up a little bit and see where the differences and similarities were. But one of the very important developments to pay attention to is that the case now sits with the Attorney General of Minnesota, and that is Keith Ellison. And he is an African-American man. And obviously we've seen changes since he's taken over that process. And we've seen the charges be upgraded from 3rd degree murder for the main perpetrator to 2nd degree murder. And so the difference there is, well, first of all, 1st degree murder, requires premeditation. In the case that I had in Portsmouth, where we ended up with a voluntary manslaughter conviction, I charged initially with 1st degree murder because it's well-established law that premeditation can be formed in an instant. And so I say that so that people can understand that premeditation is not something that requires 3 months of planning and you putting trash bags in your car and keeping, hand ties in the basement. Premeditation is well established that it can be formed right away. And so I do want people to understand that legal theory about premeditation. So that is what 1st degree murder entails here in Virginia, as well as in Minnesota. 2nd degree murder is what obviously now the charges are. And according to the statute, whoever causes death without the intent, so it doesn't require the element of premeditation, but there is also a felony offense being committed at the same time that amounts to 2nd degree murder. Here, that's what we call felony murder. And so if someone were robbing my home and in the course of that robbery, they shot and killed me, but they didn't initially intend to do it, because they were engaging in that felony, they could be charged with felony murder, which is 2nd degree murder. And so now that's what we see. 3rd degree murder is a little bit different. That's what's referred to as depraved heart murder, where someone is engaging in, reckless behavior with such a disregard for human life, that creates that different 3rd degree category there in the state of Minnesota. And my understanding is now those other officers who were charged are now charged with aiding and abetting that 2nd degree murder. And so that's the quick and dirty breakdown of what I can give you about what I was able to pull from the Minnesota code. But the bottom line is that, once again, you brought up this voting component. And it's very important not only to vote, but to have these conversations in advance about what the expectations are going to be of the person holding office if we, in fact, encounter one of these situations. And so I don't know what the conversations were with the local district attorney there in that area, but I am glad to see progress being made with Keith Ellison coming on board, the Attorney General, and increasing those charges, which is fully within his discretion. But I did not want to leave this conversation without talking about that element of premeditation and, dealing with the misconceptions that may be where people think that it requires some advanced and significant and lengthy amount of planning, when in reality, premeditation can be formed in an instant. And if you have made that decision that you are going to, in fact, kill someone, and it's not justifiable, meaning your life is not in danger, then you have potentially premeditated that murder. So that's kind of where we are. But again, in Virginia, the Commonwealth, the court, or the defense can refuse to waive jury, and all of us can demand a jury trial. In the officer involved shooting case that we had in Portsmouth, I indicated I would not waive jury. The court also indicated it would not waive jury. So we never even heard from the officer and the defendant whether he wanted a jury. I had determined that's what I was going to have, and so did the court. And so again, it was ultimately so important to have a jury that was representative of the makeup of the community. So that in fact, not only would the defendant get a fair trial, because we always talk about a fair trial for the defendant, which is gravely important because normally it's people who look like us. But the Commonwealth, in that instance, we wanted to make sure too, because we had a victim who was an 18-year-old unarmed Black African-American young man. So very, very important to understand what is happening, and very, very important to understand just how imperative it is to have representation on juries every step of the way.
Now that case that you had was a very historic and landmark case that you oversaw, and God bless you to do very, very well. We have been blessed to see the first leg in this George Floyd situation, as far as the second degree murder allocation, and then the other three bring it in, but justice doesn't stop there. This is just the beginning of the process. I want to ask both of you, and I guess Pastor Goodman, you can lead out, and then Attorney, if you would like to share on it, you can follow suit. Now that we're here, we have just this year, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, now George Floyd. In addition to those three deaths, we had a situation in Texas not too long ago, another situation in Nebraska and in Indiana, and then everybody watched the showing there in New York and in Central Park with the perception and the thought process of the Caucasian lady there with the man that was just asking for her to leash her dog. It shows that there's a great divide yet in our country and how people process. There's still people that think that racism doesn't exist, and then you have those that now are awakening to it. We now have this budding generation of millennials and Generation Z. My son that's coming out of high school, a lot of people are focused on the millennials now, but there's another generation that's coming behind them. My son is coming into college, and he's not a millennial. But they're excited, they're passionate, and they're very angry about what is going on. So now that we have the protests and we have the hashtags and we have the Blackout Fridays, Pastor Goodman, what is next?
Wow, great question. First of all, let me piggyback on what Attorney Morales talked about, because I do think that's a very poignant point about the law. And I think she's explained it very eloquently. At the end of the day, when we see these charges, most people must understand that the law throughout our nation is not universal, or is not also unilateral. And each state has a different way they interpret certain things. So I know there was some outcry about the third degree, but once again, I think Attorney Morales explained it, that at the end of the day, each state has a different way they interpret murder or felonies or those kind of things. So I appreciate when people kind of get more information and engage in that, because sometimes we just jump because we hear certain things. And honestly, I was kind of glad that they started lower, because we've seen sometimes we overreach in certain situations like this. And then it becomes very hard. Once you put that out there, it becomes very hard to prove it. And then we end up getting someone that gets off. And so I'm grateful. I was one who was like, hey, build it up, because at the end of the day, we don't want to overreach on this one. We've seen it happen before, and it will be difficult. Attorney Morales probably can talk to this later. It depends on the state and depends on the person. They could say they felt they was stand your ground law, which has happened here in Georgia and in Florida. I'm not really sure how that is in the other states. So I think that's number one that's going to be crucial. But the other one that you asked is, this has caused an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be happening. But here's the reality. White people need to have the conversation. And here is why. At the end of the day, I'm grateful that it's happening, but I will be honest with you, as a faith leader, even in my city and beyond, man, when this thing started happening, I started getting white pastors calling me and wanted to have conversations talking about racial reconciliation. And I vehemently was like, I don't want to have that. That's not the conversation starter. And I always feel like these moments like this, we get a lot of people, especially white people, typically who want to have the conversation, say they support you, and want reconciliation, want us to come out holding hands without, first of all, understanding that there can be no reconciliation without recognition and repentance. At the end of the day, this is forcing people to admit that there is a problem. That's why the first thing people got to know is there is a problem. The issue is racism is a problem. This is not some made up kind of arbitrary thing. Black people have not been talking this for a long time. We're not just making this up. This is a real issue. And one of the interesting things about the conversation is, if you notice over the last couple of days, you can see how the conversation keeps getting co-opted. You'll notice how it moves from the reason why they're protesting to the protest. Because that's an easier conversation to have. It's easier to talk about how we shouldn't be violent. It's easier to talk about how we need to not loot, instead of being honest about, understand, no matter what happens. And do not advocate violence or any of those kind of things. And I could sure enough tell you my own conspiracy theorists about how a lot of the violent acts have not been Black people. It's been insurrections and people trying to co-opt the narrative, but we don't have enough time tonight to delve into that. But what I'm saying is that we lost it, and that becomes an easier conversation for white people to have and those in power, and then to talk about what we saw with our own eyes. And I think that is the problem. That is the issue. That's the issue when we had the conversation with Drew Brees, who in this moment still thinks the protest is about a flag. The most damning video I saw, and the George Floyd death was horrible, and the Ahmaud Arbery one was bad. But the one that really kind of resonated with me was a white woman in the park, who in that moment, she wasn't a MAGA, she wasn't a quote unquote conservative, she was a Northern liberal, right? Who in that moment realized that police are a weapon. And she realized that if I turned on my white tears and operated my white fragility, then I can get the police to be a weapon against you, which has debunked the reality for so long when the dominant culture wanted to suggest that they didn't think it was a problem. That video epitomized, that police are an issue with my community. And you feel that if you call and they show up, that is something bad is going to happen. We've seen that from people calling the cops on people sleeping in apartment. I mean, in their dorm areas, people selling ice cream. As that the dominant culture understands that these police, law enforcement, is a deterrent and a weapon against Black and brown people. They cannot dismiss that. And one of the other challenges that I'm having is that, I'll be honest, most of my white colleagues, brothers and sisters who come with me, I say, listen, I don't think I need to be in this in this conversation, because the conversation, Black people know the problem. We know racism is real. True change is going to happen when the dominant culture starts having their conversations within themselves. That you got to understand, first of all, this is a problem, and it's only going to happen not in your public display, because I can go off on the hypocrisy of what I've been seeing, because I see all these companies blacking out, I support George Floyd, and that doesn't impress me. Show me a picture of your corporate board. Show me a balance sheet of what you've invested in your communities. You do not impress me with a social media post. And here's another thing that I also wrestle with in having this conversation with the dominant culture of white people, is that every time I have the conversation, they personalize it. So when I start talking to people about what's going on, the first response is, well, I'm not racist. I got Black friends, and I'm trying to tell them, you cannot personalize this. Our anger and ire is against a system. It's not a
Yeah.
person. It's a system. And whether you feel like you have ever said the N-word or ever felt like you're racist, at the end of the day, this is a system. And you got to understand it's bigger than us. And it's at the end of the day, it directly benefits you and is a detriment to me. Regardless if you want to acknowledge it or not, that's the reality. So when we're having these conversations, I had to keep people on point. Understand our ire is not at a person. As bad as that guy is in the White House, what we're mad at is the system that allowed that to happen. A system that allows them to talk about law and order. A system that is, once again, historically been against us, and proverbially in the case of George Floyd and Black and brown communities had its knee on our necks. And at the end of the day, that's the reality. And that's what we're fighting against. And that's the challenge of everything. So when you want to have the conversation and where we go, I tell them it starts with, number one, you admitting it's a problem. And if you don't understand, once again, I'm not asking you to understand. I'm not asking you to know what it feels like to be Black in America. That's not what I'm asking you. But I am asking you to at least acknowledge the fact that my experience is valid and what we're saying is true. And even if you don't understand or agree, it is our perspective and it is real to us.
Definitely. Somebody stated as an example that there was no racism in the NFL. While Colin Kaepernick is out of a job, and the owner's box lets us know how exclusive they
think
are.
About owners. I mean, you think about the verbiage. So, I mean, NFL, they're duplicitous. At the end of the day, that's an asinine statement. And now all of a sudden you want to be on the side of social justice and supporting people. No, at the end of the day, Colin Kaepernick did a peaceful protest and they didn't like it. And you can't tell people how to protest. That's one of the hallmarks of privilege. You can tell me how you want the protest to be to make you feel comfortable. It's just asinine and it's crazy.
Attorney Morales, where do we go from here? Jump into conversation. What's on your mind?
Okay, so it's like I gotta chime in on some of the things that my brother just said. One, I thought you brought up a very valid, important thing about the nature of charges. Before I get into that, I don't want to lose this area of the discussion. So in Minnesota, we saw charges being upgraded, and you spoke to being concerned about charges being trumped up, and here in Virginia, we have charges where we have lesser included offenses. Mm-hmm. And so that's another thing that's very important to know the difference between as a nation, as we educate throughout this time, is we got to pay attention in these different states to whether you can start off with a first degree and have a lesser included of second and a lesser included of voluntary manslaughter, which means that if you go to jury trial and the jury says, well, I don't think there was premeditation, but I do think that there was an intent and it was malicious, I want to go with second. Or I don't think there was a malicious intent and I think that there was a mutual combat, I want to go with voluntary manslaughter, then it makes sense to start off with first if there's probable cause to believe there was premeditation. But then in some states, if you don't have that lesser included and you can upgrade later, it's important to know the difference. So I was glad you mentioned that, because legally, again, there are so many differences, but we have to be educated. We have to arm ourselves with education so that we understand what's happening and what we demand. And so getting back to your question, where do we go from here? First of all, I have to say, like, I am one of these older millennials. I'm 36. The millennials, we're getting up there a little bit. So really, like, when we see these young people out there getting it, just making us so proud, that is a lot of Gen Z and a lot of these younger millennials who are leading the charge, to really see a different America. And I have seen so many different videos. Some of them are playing music and dancing. They're really doing it their way. They are doing it their way. And so I think what has to happen is, in order for us to see a real change, we have to change the way we're operating. We cannot engage in perpetuating the status quo and expect for anything to change. A lot of these systems of oppression, they truly have to be overhauled. And that means that we need representation in every area of power. And that means that, again, that participation for our community members, that doesn't stop at voting, that doesn't stop at jury service. That means you have to step up to the plate and lead. Yep. So a lot of what I do in my office and my Future Leaders Initiative program that I have, it's not about making myself feel good because I'm doing something with you. It's about saying to them, this is your responsibility to come behind me and take over this office and be somebody who's of and from our community, who is going to care very deeply and see yourself in the people who come before you. And so really, this is not a problem that started overnight. It's not going to fix overnight. And because of that, we have to talk about, I don't even want to get started on intergenerational wealth, but we do have to have that conversation about beginning to build intergenerational wealth. But we also have to build intergenerational power. We cannot get into positions of power and hold on forever and hoard it because we want to be kings and queens. We have to be servants, and we have to really develop the next leaders who are going to do exactly what these Gen Z and young millennials are doing right now, which is showing us what change looks like. Yes. And so if we want to see a change, we have to change. We have to stop trying to operate under the status quo, because that is what got us here, embracing that and being polite as we watch ourselves suffer from all types of systemic inequities for our entire lives, our parents' lives, and their parents' lives.
Pastor Sellers, can I interject real quick?
Absolutely.
Because I think what you get, and I really want to get to the nuts and bolts of where I've really been thinking through on this, because at the end of the day, this whole thing is huge. I mean, for us to make really what I believe sizable progress, it's going to take a while. But the old adage is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So I've been really thinking through this, and I really want to throw this out for you guys to kind of help me continue to hone, because I as being a thought leader and a mentor to so many pastors throughout this country, and they've been asking, all right, Pastor, how do we move? And what's some things that you're thinking that we should focus on? So these are three things that I think are significant. It's something I call moment to movement Black agenda. And I would love to get some ideas from you, especially with the question you asked, Pastor Sellers. And we have Attorney Morales on here, because I do think these three things, I think, are tangible things that we could literally do right now with them before 2020 is done, before our because it's a crucial year, not only with the census, but also politically. So here it is. Number one, there needs to be law enforcement reform. I do believe that every police department needs to have a citizen review board. In moments like this, it does not need to be in the hands of the police. They don't need the police to tell the police how the police did their job. This whole blue code is really killing us in moments like this, and we're being too silent. Also, I've been talking to our sheriff and others about what I call community mirror placement of policing. We need to do a better job of recruiting people from the community to police their community. One of the great issues we have is that we're putting people into communities that they're not familiar with. And so I believe that we ought to incentivize letting people know from that community that there ought to be greater incentive for them to police that community. There is better connectivity when the person who is once again having to police me looks like me and knows me and is part of our community. Also, number three would push what we call community cultural sensitivity training. When this happened some years ago, I talked to our sheriff. I said, here's the problem. Y'all not in community, and you're sending people there that do not know the communities they're serving. They are going there with the mindset of things they see on TV and their own prejudices, and they don't know it. Our culture is different. We are loud people by nature. We're not being disagreeable. This is how we are. Go to any Black function and you know how we are. There needs to be in everyone what we call community cultural sensitivity training. Before I send you to that community, let's talk about what that community's like and what to expect. Because a lot of times what I'm seeing is perhaps these cops are not operating as racist. A lot of them just scared. Right. And so they're fighting their own cultural biases. And then fourth, I do think they need to do a better job of tactical training. A lot of the stuff, regardless if a person loses their life or not, if certain tactical things or techniques are used, automatically that person should be suspended and done. You have armor, you have guns. This person is unarmed and using chokeholds and knee to the neck. Those are, regardless if the person loses their life or not, these are things that, I feel like if they're brought in, should be done. So number one is law enforcement reform. Number two is what Attorney Morales was talking about. I think we need to have what is called a minority progressive policy change. In other words, we should do a better job within our community of voting and supporting candidates that have our best interests and holding them accountable on the local and state level. Most times we keep getting caught up with the federal, but most of the things that impact us on our everyday basis is local and state elections. It's not just the presidential cycle. It's every opportunity we ought to get there to vote. And so I think that's very important, but we also got to put money there. But also challenge somebody. The other day, I just did early voting in Georgia. And I will admit to you that when it came to vote, I did not know many of the judicial candidates. They don't have much they don't have to run ads and stuff. A lot of times we don't know them. So I got on the phone as soon as I finished and I called a lot of the Black attorneys in my city and I said, hey guys, I think what will be beneficial. I didn't know many of them, but y'all do. We need to create what I call a candidate grading system. We ought to create a criteria for where these people stood in certain issues. And you're not endorsing anybody, but this is where this judge graded out on. This is where this person graded out on. And we disseminate that. I'm not endorsing nobody, but this is where they are. And this is what they voted on in this thing. This is what they leaned on in this, because for many of us, we see the ads for legislation. We see the ads for the executive board, but we don't see many ads for the judicial board. And they really impact us every single day. The third thing I would talk about is strategic economic empowerment. In other words, what I say is that we ought to leverage the power of the Black dollar through partnerships and companies and institutions that have our best interests. Right now, because of the economy, as bad as it is, the Black dollar has never been stronger. And if we could figure out a way to leverage our Black economic power, that's what they listen to. That's what they want to know. Most of these companies are trying to rebound. And if we would once again be very strategic, because at the end of the day, what white America sees is green. If it affects their bottom line is when we see the issue. And we need to do a better job of investing in Black and small businesses with resources and our presence. We got to do a better job of supporting one another. Don't just give me lip service, but I'm talking about with true resources and putting your money where your mouth is. Those are the three things that I was really thinking through that are tangible things that I think we could get done in the immediate future. Deal with law enforcement reform, deal with how we get in the voting process, but also create that candidate grading system, and then use our Black dollar now. We've never had more economic power. They gave us checks. We ought to invest that and do something to really make a difference. So that's what I've been kind of thinking through.
Pastor Goodman, you have given us a great outline, which is what this conversation is all about. I'm going to release attorney to speak to this, to the 3 points that you've given us. And then I want to definitely come back on the back end as we're coming to the close of our broadcast to really tie in what she said as far as intergenerational power, intergenerational wealth, and connect that with the last point you just made with the power of the Black dollar. Attorney, what's your thoughts on the outline Pastor Goodman has given to us?
So first of all, that was a mic drop. It's like almost like you dropped it. I caught it. But I will say this. When we start talking about policing, if you are a person who is afraid of Black people, you do not need to be a police officer. You cannot be made to be unafraid. You are inherently afraid of Black people, and that is a problem. You cannot be a police officer if you are afraid. And so that's one of the things that I get very concerned about is when we as members of the Black community start getting in the trenches and in the weeds of figuring out how we can fix something that's wrong with the person that cannot be fixed. You are a public servant if you choose to be a police officer. That means you are there to serve and protect. There is nothing about a police officer that we hear that they're there to surveil and harass or to attack or to, look at somebody like they're anything other than a mother, a father, a son, a sister. These are our family members. And when I look at people who come through the criminal legal system, that's what I see. This could be somebody in my family if circumstances were different. And that is the problem. We have gotten into this where we want to sensitivity train and we want to get bias training and we want to do all of that stuff is great. But the bottom line is some of these questions need to be asked up front where, police departments are providing lie detector tests to talk about different things that they deem important. Why are we not talking about race? Once again, there is this attitude where we feel we have to be polite and we have to be respectful, but this is life and death. And so I really, when we start talking about police reform and, you know, some of the trainings or the mechanisms to address how police officers feel, you should love everybody. And I will say this, you know, I have friends of all races, all walks of life from all over this country, different socioeconomic statuses. And I am so proud to be friends with the people I'm friends with, because my social media on Tuesday was completely blacked out with all my friends of all races, just saying Black Lives Matter, period. It wasn't no discussion about, well, I'm not this way or any, it was none of that. It was Black Lives Matter. You know, we stand with you, stop killing. That was it. That's what I saw. And that's what we need. And that is the society that we can have if we demand more and we stop prancing around the issues and treating people like divas. We don't have time. We can't afford to do that. We're losing lives. And so, you know, you gave a word. I won't add to anything that you said. We absolutely, citizen review boards are a wonderful thing. But once again, I stress the importance of members of the Black community stepping into that role. We are at a disadvantage because, again, we don't have that intergenerational wealth. And so when some of these opportunities to come up to participate in these citizen review panels, we got to go to work. Or if it's time for jury service and we, you know, we're going to get that $30 a day that they give to jurors in the little lunch, but we're going to miss out on our check. We can't, sometimes we can't do that. And so these are conversations that we have to have about these systemic inequities that really create a barrier for us being able to delve in and engage. And then you talked about investing that stimulus check. Some people can't, some people don't, they have food insecurity. They can't do it. And so we have to remember that all of these inequities and all the systemic oppression, it has consequences down to the very core of the issues that we're talking about, and even being able to participate. How are you going to fill out a census if you don't have a cell phone service, if you can't keep your internet cut on, if you don't have time to be home to wait to sit with the census person because you're working 3 jobs to feed your children who are now out of school and they can't eat during the school day? And so these are problems that we have to address to create the space in the room for us to even breathe enough to be able to participate in the way that we have to be able to make an impact.
Yep.
Pastor Goodman and attorney, I wish we had more time to really discuss and hash this all out. I think that we have a long ways to go. We definitely need to take what Pastor Goodman has said and take it across the country, across the nation, and implement it as much as we can. I believe there's about above 15,000 police forces that need to adopt a plan like this, similar to this, or the exact plan, so that we can have equity across the board and not hit and miss. As a pastor, and I'm sure Pastor Goodman, well, I know Pastor Goodman is of the same heart and mind. I love Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys. I love the stories of the Bible, but I try to make it apply in such a way that it speaks to where we are today. And one of the things that I've been sharing with our members at Mount Tabor in Smithfield, Virginia, where I serve, and Dominion in Chesapeake / Portsmouth, where I serve, is the importance of us being responsible. I'm really challenging our young people to consider going into fields of education. Let's be strategic and making sure we get people in education, in the medical field, in politics. I'm so happy to see what took place in Ferguson with the new Black female mayor there. We have a Black female mayor in Washington, D.C., and then what we have there in Atlanta, Georgia. We need more young adults. We need more people getting involved in the process. We need more lawyers. We need more judges. We need to be strategic in getting our people. Oftentimes we feel like, or our young people feel like, that entertainment or sports is the only place for them. And I'm thankful, because we need entertainers, we need athletes, but there are other areas that we got to be challenged to go in. With that said, I'm all economic empowerment and financial literacy. And I would like to kind of close this conversation off in this discussion right here about the power of the Black dollar, as Pastor Goodman has suggested. We're 14% of the population, yet we are responsible for 50% of the consumerism. $1 trillion and above is coming out the Black community, yet we're the one whose dollar leaves out of the community as soon as we get it. How can we empower people and express the importance of the Black dollar? I am, and I don't want to take up all of the time here, but my heart aches every time I think about the fact that we had the Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, and we have not been able to reconvene and reconstruct and revisit that. We need to think in terms of ownership. I think Tyler Perry have given us an excellent example of how to own everything, own your rights, own your material. Can the two of you close us out with sharing with us the importance of Black economics?
Yeah, I'll let Attorney Morales take that, and then I can jump in because I think that's a very important thing to my heart.
So we have to own, we have to begin to, well, first of all, I'll say this is a conversation about self-love, whether people catch that or not right away. It all amounts to support. And when you support somebody, it's supposed to be coming from a place of love. And so we are the most supportive people. We are loving everybody, but we are not loving ourselves. And so we really need to pay attention to, first as individuals, what are your individual needs? What are your family's needs? Do you want to create a legacy for your children and their children? Do we want to start to build intergenerational wealth? And how do we invest in ourselves? You go to work, and then when you get your check, do you pay yourself first? Do you save? Do you put something to the side so that if you ever got that idea off the ground and you could create that business where you can work for yourself, that is a possibility for you? I don't know if we're loving ourselves enough to do that. So we have to have these conversations about how we love ourselves. We're talking about how do we take care of our bodies and make sure that we're well, but financially, that financial wellness is also a component of self-love. And so we've got to talk to our children. First of all, the only way we're going to create educators, lawyers, public servants that our children, the only way we're going to create them is to let them see it. They see entertainers, they see athletes. They don't see enough people who are lawyers coming in their classrooms to talk to them to say, I come from exactly where you come from. You can do exactly this because I did it. They don't see enough educators all the time who look like them, who love them, and who say, I came right from where you are. I want you to be like me when you grow up. And so all of these discussions that we're having around how we take and empower our dollar, or how do we empower our young people to achieve and become whatever they can become, it really translates back to love. It translates back to how we begin to love ourselves, in a society that traditionally just has not loved us. And so, without getting into great detail, the bottom line is we really need to talk to our children about the value of home ownership, the value of entrepreneurship, the value of financial literacy. And we need to fight to ensure that financial literacy courses are being taught in our public school systems, that entrepreneurship courses are being taught in our public school systems, because the reality is that everybody does not come from the same level of understanding. And so while we may understand this, I'll give an example. In St. Louis, Missouri, the treasurer there is Tashura Jones. And she has done some amazing financial empowerment things in her school systems. And she, as I think the tax, she's the person who's responsible for the traffic citations. She has taken that money and created savings funds and college funds for the children in her jurisdiction. And they are able to get even more added into their fund if their parents come and take these financial empowerment and literacy courses. And so we really have to get creative now to make sure that we're doing all that we can to teach our people how to love themselves, from loving their bodies and taking care of their mental, their mental well-being, to being financially empowered and focusing on that financial well-being and creating that intergenerational wealth to make sure that our young people who come up are as situated in the best position possible to lead us through the next centuries and to bring our country around to where it needs to be to create the society for them that they truly deserve.
I'm in total agreement. I think at the end of the day, one of the things we have to do, and I agree with you, is really learn the process of money, learn the process of this economy and how we can get better. I really challenged my congregation. It's over the last couple of months. We realize it's not just a health crisis, but an economic crisis. And I'm grateful. Our church raised over $55,000 that we're giving to close to 40 small businesses in our community, just as kind of a hope seed offering. We really push entrepreneurship at our church because I really believe, unfortunately, in our community, we're the only ones that every generation has to start over.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We're every other generation, every other demographic, they already starting way down the line. Every one of our generation, unfortunately, we don't leave much behind. As a pastor, I've seen people die and take. We rarely die and leave, but that's what it's going to take. It's going to take legacy. So I'm really pushing people to, hey, let's be entrepreneurship and learn how to navigate the process of making generational wealth. You don't want to be rich. You want to be wealthy. You want things that's going to last, right? And make that investment. So we do need better home ownership. We also need, I believe in this, in really honestly investing in our own banking system, our own banks. That's important because, man, on a personal note, God has graced me to do well. I'm tired of having to jump through hoops to go through process of buying a loan, of getting a loan. And the issue is, it's easier probably to get a car loan than it is to get a business loan. Think about that. They understand if I can stop you economically. And so we got to be able to leverage our own. When I first got here about 13 years ago to Tabernacle, there was a black bank in our area. It went under because we didn't support it like we should have, but we've got to, this is the moment to say, hey, we realize the importance of what we have, what we need to do, because until you have that economic power, like you said, we're over 50% of the consumerism in this country, and we're only 13-14% of the population. Our dollar is major and is impactful. We got to leverage it. We got to support our own and step back, and that's going to be very crucial and critical. We believe in trying to teach people. I think that needs to be mandatory within our schools and even in our churches. Financial literacy. Let's talk about what it means to be good stewards of what we have, right? And figure that piece out. You're paying rent, but let's see what it is, because at the end of the day, I could actually get you a mortgage that's cheaper than your rent. And what that means, right? That there's something to be said about that. Let's look at it. I understand you want to go to college. All right. Think about how much debt coming out on the other end, right? So let's figure out all this kind of piece. When I was growing up, we touched every scholarship as possible. There was a scholarship for people right-handed. There's a scholarship, so we got to figure out ways to kind of engage it so that we can empower one another, because my chief aim before I die, not only to get as many people as I can to heaven, but also to say, hey, listen, let's create generational wealth. Let's leave something so the next generation doesn't have to start back at the starting line.
I'm totally with you, Pastor Goodman. This has been such a phenomenal conversation with two stellar individuals who are both making a difference in the community and is being felt abroad. I just want to challenge our viewers. First of all, I want to thank our viewers that have taken the time to come in. And for those of you that may have come in late, you still have time to like and to share, because this will be on for forever. So we want you to get the word out, tag other people in and say, hey, you may have missed it, but you can get in and hear some of the good things and nuggets that were left in this conversation. I appreciate Attorney Morales. Again, I thank you for your being such a trailblazer as a millennial that is making great strides and affecting the community in such a great way. I pray that God will continue to sustain you and help you to continue to make a difference, and that our young women and our young men will see that they too can follow such a pattern, follow such a model, such as yourself. Thank you for what you're doing for our Commonwealth. And then to Pastor Goodman, who is an outstanding, phenomenal preacher and visionary, who has a tremendous ministry there that is making a difference. I appreciate what you have given us tonight as well, and the role model that you are for so many. You're such an inspiration for so many, and we ask and pray God's blessings upon you. To all of our viewers that have been watching, again, please continue to share, start a watch party. I want to challenge you to stay strong in the process. Don't stop fighting, keep the process going, but let's also enlarge and not just protest, but let's make sure that we get out and we vote If you have not done so already, make sure you fill out the census link. There's a link that they have that you can go online and do, or you can meet with the person in person and take the census. But we need your voice to be heard so that monies can be funneled to our cities and to our areas so that we can be rightly counted and acknowledged. I'm challenging every one of you to keep the fight alive. Let's hold our government officers accountable. Let's speak truth to power. And guess what? Charity begins at home and then spread abroad. For those of us that are parents, let's take out the time to educate our children, to walk our children through the journey, and then let us be willing to share things that were closed off to us. Let's build the generational wealth. Let's leave a legacy. And those of us that are in power, that intergenerational power, let's be willing to the next generation shadow us so that we can hold off and hand off the baton, and there can be a fluid transition instead of people having to start from scratch and start all over again. We are a great people. We are a powerful people. God has graced us. God has blessed us, and the best is yet ahead of us. And so thank you to all of you that are watching, and thank you to our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Honored. Bless you, man.
God bless you all. Until we meet again, this is Pastor Clarence Sellers Jr. with you with the Lead with Pastor CJ. God bless you. I love you, and good night.